Our guest on today's episode is Melinda Padilla Lynch. Melinda works for the Bowman County Police Department as an administrative assistant. And she joins us on the podcast to talk about a couple things. First of all, she has a really cool and unique perspective on what it's like to move to a rural, small town when you originally grew up in a big city. She and her husband had no previous ties to the community that they moved to, and we talk all about what that transition was like for her. But she also came on to discuss and share. She offers some really cool wisdom about local law enforcement, which all of our communities need to support our local law enforcement. And then as an administrative support person, she felt like that group of people is not being supported in the way that she thinks they could be. So she shares her entire process of how she started researching and networking and figuring out what she could do to solve this problem for herself and for others like her. And that is really the spirit of what Growing Small Towns is about, right? Like if you see a need or you see a gap that needs to be filled, maybe you are the one to do something. And Melinda shares her entire process for what that looked like for her. And she's now going into her second year of this conference that she put on to support people like her. It's a very cool episode, lots of relatable and usable tactics and strategies that you can use in your own small town. So enjoy this chat with Melinda Lynch. Hey, Melinda, welcome to the Growing Small Town Show.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here today.
Hey, there's nothing I love more than when people reach out and say, we're doing this really cool thing. I'd love to tell you about it, which is kind of what happened with you. So please just kind of start wherever you want to start. Tell us who you are, what we're talking about today. And then, of course, I'll jump in and ask questions if I have them.
That'd be great. So I started with the Bowman PD 5 years ago. Actually, I just celebrated my 5-year anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thanks. It's been an eye-opening experience working for law enforcement in a small town. We moved to Bowman at Christmas Eve of 2011. That's a funny story on a side note. I'm originally from Kansas City, so this has been kind of a culture shock for me to move to a very rural, remote, small town.
Right. And I just, for the audience's benefit, Bowman is in North Dakota.
North Dakota, Southwest. We're about 1,600 people. We are 76 miles south of Dickinson, and we're about 2 hours north of Belfouche.
Okay.
So for us to go shopping, like big time shopping, we plan a whole day of it. We go to Dickinson or Belfouche, and it's at least an hour and a half drive either way, which way you ever go. So.
And you're from Kansas City, you said?
Yes.
Yeah, I bet that was a bit of a culture shock.
Yeah, I grew up very inner city. I grew up very, law enforcement was a scary thing to me growing up. So this is very interesting that I work for law enforcement now because I grew up in a very highly gang infested area where I had 7 people murdered in my class. So
oh my goodness.
Yeah, I grew up with a class of 4. We started with 425 and we ended up with 175 and went to the highest dropout rate high school in Kansas. So I grew up very inner city. And so this is very different for me to work for law enforcement. So I have a great appreciation for law enforcement that I think I would have never had just stumbling into this job because I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. I just thought I'm going to take a job with great benefits and great hours. And I liked the chief of police and opened my eyes completely.
Seriously, that's a fascinating background to bring into a small town. I mean, let's be real. That's not many small town people's experience.
Right.
Your high school experience. But then also, like you said, bringing that background into law enforcement. It's just that's really interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So we moved here Christmas Eve of 2011. We moved up here, like everybody else, because we needed a job. I worked for a really great doctor in Kansas City, but my husband worked for a construction company that he'd been with since he was 16. And they kept laying off. Every 6 months, they kept laying off. And he just couldn't handle that anymore. And by whirlwind chance, we just started looking at, this is how old we are, Craigslist for jobs. And North Dakota kept popping up. And I was like, well, let's just take a chance. We don't have any kids. We had no idea Bowman, what that even looked like. And we just pulled into town and we just ended up staying. And kind of a big transition for me personally, because I feel like women are so community oriented and we need those connectors and we need that networking. So that's been a very big transition for me. And part of the reason why I started this conference was for the networking and to connect other law enforcement admins.
Right. So can I ask a quick question about your transition to Bowman? overall, and I mean, this isn't in any way if it wasn't great to make Bowman like it's more just about everybody that moves to a small town that isn't from there, right?
Right.
So oftentimes we call them transplants, right?
Yeah.
Was it an easy, besides the fact that you had this urban and rural thing happening, which is a huge adjustment in and of itself, but overall, what was the transition like for you? Because neither of you were from there, which is a big challenge.
Well, and my husband grew up in a small town in southern Missouri, just north of Springfield. So he was more comfortable with the small town, and that's kind of what he wanted.
Okay.
And I'm up for anything. Like I'm game for anything. But I always thought we would just be here for like a year or two and leave. And so for us to be here now, 9-10 years and raising our children here, it's a completely different ballgame. It's been, I feel like just probably in the last year, I probably have just settled. It's taken me a long time to kind of find my place, to kind of find like my niche. It's a totally different culture than what I'm used to. Like small towns have their own culture, and I feel like people don't realize that. And the other thing too is that when you're not from a small town, people don't really accept you as a resident unless you're like born here. And so like I feel like there's a lot of like lingo and conversations with that I feel like I have a better, like when we have new people move into town and they encounter us with law enforcement, I have a better like understanding and a better language with them, because they're like, I just feel like people don't understand like what I'm struggling with. And I'm like, I totally get you. But at the same time, like there's the generosity that I see of a small town and like the coming together. I've never seen that before. Like you would see that in bigger cities, like at your workplace or your church. But like to have a whole small town come together around someone who's like, struggling with cancer, or like go to sporting events, that's been a big deal. Like for me, going to sporting events and I don't have kids in that, like that's weird to me, because that's like what people who like want to look at kids do. And I'm like, so they're like, are you going to the game tonight? I'm like, I don't have kids. They're like, no, we all go. And I'm like, that's weird to me.
That is so fascinating, Melinda, because that's totally what we do, right? Like that's, well, again, I think if you like sports, right, there's just that understanding, like that's where community happens, right, in small towns oftentimes. But I can totally see that being, again, like I grew up in my small town, left and came back, but I can really appreciate how strange and foreign that probably seemed to you. Like,
well, even like I lived down the street from my old job, and I would just walk to work, and my walk was by the school, and they're like, why aren't you saying hi to the kids when you walk by? And I would walk on the opposite side of the road because I didn't want to be like looked at as like this weird person talking to the kids through the fence. But that's very common here, and I'm like, no, but that's not what you do in bigger cities. You just keep to yourself and you do your thing. But I don't want people to think I'm like talking to their kids. So like there's been a lot.
Yeah, like who's that creepy new lady talking to the children? It really is interesting to hear your perspective. And I love that you have that statement of like, we'll be here a year. And now here you are like a decade later, still there, really finding it's starting to feel like home, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it's weird to me because we own a business here. We own a small construction business. And then I work for, our local city government. And I just, if you would have told me this like in 2011, that this would be my life, that I live in some small rural town in North Dakota and I would work for the city government and that my husband would own a construction company, I would be like, you are out of your living mind. Like, what are you thinking? Like, I'm going to live in a lockdown town in LA, But now it's so funny because now we're looking at buying a house or building and we want land. And I'm like, I don't want any neighbors. And like, to hear myself say these things out loud, I'm like, who is this lady?
You were always meant to be a small town person, it sounds like, Melinda. You just didn't know it.
I think the community and the networking aspect, I totally get that. But I feel like during the height of oil, there was such a big conversation that was not communicated with like small town people accepting transplants and transplants accepting small towns. And I feel like there should have been a whole conference like on how to transition, but I feel like that was such a missed opportunity. And I feel like if you would have saw how many people left these small towns after oil left, it's because so many of the women struggled with connecting. Yeah. And I'm like, this is why, like for me, I'm so passionate now about connecting women, because I feel like the men love it in these small towns. They love it. They love like the easiness, but it's the women who are always like, no, we got to go. And it makes me so sad to see so many people leave these rural areas because we need them. But at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, nobody's talking about this conversation of like, people from big cities aren't bad. People from small towns aren't bad. Like, how can we blend these and like accept people's ideas?
Right. I'm doing what I can to try and be a part of that conversation because it is something we talk about a lot. It's both the necessity and the need that both the dependency that both parties have on one another. And yet I think there are still a lot of people in small towns that feel like, well, we don't need them and we don't want them. Like new people, new ideas. And yet it's like, yeah, you really do need them. You do need them. And we need to figure out how to stay open-hearted, open-minded
Yeah.
to the people that make their way to us. And I totally agree with you. So I live obviously on the east side of the state. So we weren't directly impacted by oil the way that, the western part of the state was. But those small towns, I bet, just got rocked with that change. And it was chaotic and it was hard. And like you said, I'm sure a lot of people could have stayed and maybe would have stayed if they had made a home there.
Right.
Because that's what it is, right? You want to call the place home. It's not just like, oh, I live here for now.
Well, and it's interesting to me. One of the first conversations I had with a friend here was, how long do you plan on staying here? And I said, I grew up in the city. So like people coming and going is I think the benefit of growing up in a city is that you're used to people coming and going and you make these friendships and you know how to make them last. The people who grow up in ag or like rural areas, you see like seeing a cow come to birth and taking it to market and knowing the full circle of life. For me as a city person, I want to save every cow. I want to save every pig. I'm like, let them go, be free. But there is the benefit of both sides, So
Right.
like, one of the first things someone asked me, they said, how long do you plan on staying here? And I said, I don't know. And they go, if you don't plan on staying here past a year, I don't want to be your friend. And that was like a foreign concept to me because I went to 6 different grade schools. And we moved all the time just because my families are like half gypsy, And so that's just what we did. And so like, I still have friends from like that time, but you just learn to make friendships and keep them going. But that was such a weird culture thing to me. I'm like, you don't want to be my friend if I don't want to be here for more than a year?
Somebody actually said that to you?
Yeah. We used to get asked like, are you oil trash? I'm like, no, we're construction trash,
Oh, see, that even just bothers me.
I know it does.
Because I just think, well, first of all, nobody's trash. Do we really need to talk about
Right.
people like that? But it does speak to that bigger challenge of kind of that entrenched mindset of that's not healthy.
No,
So
no.
I'm sorry that was your experience.
Well, and I mean, it's just part of the experience, but it's made me appreciate and be more aware, like I was just talking to a leadership group and I said, I don't think sometimes that North Dakotans realize they're kind of intrusive of like, where are you from? Who is your family? Like, they want to know like my bloodline. And I'm like, don't you want to know me as a person? Like who cares? Like where I came from? Who cares? Like who, like how are you? They're trying to like connect the dots, but I'm like, that is such a weird concept to me because I feel like that's like very invasive. Like I would never ask a city friend, like, who are you related to? And we just get to know them as people right there. But it's very normal, like these 6 degrees of North Dakotans. That's what I call it. Like who are you related to? Where are you going? Where's your connection? And so like part of like the reason I created this conference for law enforcement admins was just because I felt like there's got to be other admins out there who felt like I did, like who felt very disconnected. We're very alone in our communities because we see the worst in our communities. We have no one to talk about it with. And, there's that, we want to support our officers. We want to love our community. But at the same time, like part of our job is to protect and serve, is to protect the community, to not let them know like all these horrible things. So I felt very alone for a long time, but I still loved my job. And so that was part of the reason why I started this conference.
I want to get to the conference, and we're going to with just after one question maybe comment and or a question. It's really funny to me because what you're talking about, these questions that we ask, right? Somebody moves to our community. They're not, especially when neither party has connections to the community. All those questions are simply the people trying to figure out why the hell you showed up here. That's what it is, right? Like, why here? And the reason, and I can totally appreciate that feeling, like you said, fairly intrusive. Like, well, what's it to you? I'm here. But I think that's something for small towns. We need to stop acting so surprised that a person might choose us. And I'm gonna reference a previous guest, Ben Winchester from the University of Minnesota. We talked about this. Like, this idea of when people show up in our communities to instead of being like shocked and a little bit suspicious, like we're a little bit like questioning, like, who are you and why are you here? I mean, it's natural for people if you have like, because Bowman kind of in the middle of everywhere in Bowman, right? You're pretty far from big cities. But I think we need to start recognizing that there are people looking for opportunity. And if our communities have those opportunities and we're publicizing them, why wouldn't we want people to be accepting those things, right? But so I just wanted to comment on that because I can totally get that you're like, why are you asking me all these questions? Well, we're just trying to figure out the reason.
Well, it's even funny because I just started doing obstacle course races this summer and I was doing one. And here I am, in like the 4th mile, like, I'm out of breath, chubby, running through. And we get to this big tunnel. We're supposed to crawl through this tunnel. And this older lady's sitting there. They had someone at every obstacle to make sure you don't die. And she's like, where are you from? And I'm thinking, why are you asking me this now? You're not from here, are you? And I'm like, no. And I like gave her a look of death. Like, come on, lady. I'm like out of breath. I have 1 more mile to go. Like, this is not the time. I come out on the other side of the tunnel. She's like, you're not from the Dickinson area, are you? And I'm like, no, ma'am, I'm not. And she's like, okay, nice to meet you. And just kept, I'm like, this is not the time and the place to do 6 degrees in North Dakota. And like, I am not ready to die. I'm on the 4th mile going through a tunnel of mud like a crazy person. But it's just very common, especially because I don't fit and I don't look and I don't dress like the normal thing. But, I have to say, I appreciate that I had a couple friends. They took me to rodeos. They took me to all kinds of things. I had a lot of questions. I was always rooting for the goat that got tied, And I was like, why are those cows wearing helmets? And they're like, what do you mean? And I said, those cows, why are they like slow? Like, what? And they go, what do you mean? And I said, well, why are they wearing helmets? But they look like helmets that you put on someone that like falls over all the time. They go, no, those are so when they rope them, they don't burn their. I was like, oh, I mean, I asked tons of questions when I came. I'm like, what do you mean a bull cell? Like, what do you mean? Like, there's calving season. Like, I asked so many questions when I first got here. It was like a foreign concept. And I still, when they like put the ad out in the paper and it tells like all these letters and numbers about like cattle, and I feel like it's hieroglyphics to me. I'm like, what does that even mean? She's a sturdy weight with good hips. And I'm like, are they talking about me? Like, I feel like they're like describing me. Like, she's a good worker. And I'm like, oh my God.
I think you have to be so freaking delightful for people in Bowman. I can't even stand it because I just think it's so funny to me. But I'll just say this, like I'm from a small town, but we're not, my family, we farm, but we are not into livestock. So all of this stuff I still even struggle with a lot of it because it's not my world. But I think how great. Well, and so it sounds though, like you quickly had somebody that reached a hand out to you and said, like, welcome to the community, come along to this thing with us. Is that kind of how you found your way into the community was?
I just started asking questions. I'm like, what do you guys do here for fun? Like, and I personally don't drink. So like that eliminated a few things for me.
I bet.
So they're like, come to a rodeo, come to a, bull. And I'm like, what in the world are these things? And I was like, they would tell me like where to sit and what to look for and this kind of horse and this kind of cattle. And I mean, I feel like now, like when I talk to my family back home, I'm like, oh, we're in calving season right now. So it's kind of busy, and Matt's not as busy because and they're like, what? And they're like, oh, I'm like, well, the whole world around Bowman revolves around ag, so I'm like, oh, and then implementing, all these things. And they're like, you know way too much, Melinda. Like, and I'm like, no, I feel like I'm a well-rounded brown girl from the city now. So.
Well, I honestly thank you so much for sharing the whole arc of your story. Because I think
we should have a whole conference on this.
Well, it's super important. It is super important. It's important both for the people that are transplanting and for the communities that are accepting them or not in a lot of cases. Because and I think it's probably going to be even. So North Dakota had their big influx of people from outside the state because of oil. Right. But I think with COVID and with everything that's happening there, everybody's talking about it. Anybody that studies it, we're talking about out-migration, right? From rural communities to, urban communities and urban centers to smaller places. So I think this is something that we do need to talk about and really try to help people navigate it. Because if we can ease that transition for all parties involved, think about how nice that would actually be. We'd have
Yeah,
more people that would maybe decide to call our small towns home, which is
I
important.
almost feel like it's like when someone's like, you're dating her, like it's almost that implementing of like, you moved to Bowman, like why would you want to move here? And it's almost like they don't realize they're like, you're dating. Why did you even date her? It's like implementing that there's like almost saying that there's something wrong.
Yeah, well,
like, why would I move to Bowman?
Well, and if a resident is saying that to you, you should look at them and say, well, you live here.
Right.
Like, don't you like it here? I don't get it. But it's this thing like we automatically question why, when really we should be like, well, of course they did. So it's a whole thing, and we'll tackle that another day. But so tell me about your conference, how it started, what it's become, because, and I want to say this, that it's a very specific thing that you're going to be talking about. And I don't know that the majority of people are going to be like, oh my gosh, I'm in law enforcement and I need this. Like, that's not the point. The point is more that as a transplant, I'm going to frame it this way, that as a transplant new to the community, you had a critical need that was not being filled for yourself in a very specific niche role, which doesn't matter. But instead of saying, why doesn't anybody do this? Why isn't this here? Why, and like blaming everybody else, you said, I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to create a solution. And that is exactly the kind of people and the mindsets that I want to talk to. Right. So with that, tell us all about this conference.
Sure. Well, originally, what we have our chamber and our EDC office does a great business and networking conference here, and it's called Fusion.
Yes.
I love that conference. I look forward to it every year, and they bring in some really phenomenal speakers. One of the speakers talked about community, and he has a book, 13 Ways to Kill Your Community by Doug Griffiths. And
cool. We're going to link to that in the show notes.
Yes. He challenges a lot of mindsets.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I kept thinking was, who is in my community? Like I felt like there's got to be other law enforcement admins out there. So through a long research, I started asking questions like, well, why can't I go to some of these meetings for like auditors and stuff like that? They're like, well, there's nothing really geared towards you specifically. So like, I was like, well, why isn't there anything geared towards us? Like, we deal with some of the worst people in our communities. We serve this dual role of like serving our officers, but at the same time, we serve the community. Like, I wonder why there's nothing. So I started researching, found that Texas had a really great for just sheriff admins. And they do a 3-day conference. They bring in like all these speakers, and it's geared just towards the sheriff side of things. And then I started looking at Florida had this 3-tier training for chief of police admins, like to certification type thing. And I was like, why are we separating so much? Like sheriff, PD, like already in law enforcement, there's already kind of like, this is my area, this is mine, and I was like,
right.
Why aren't we unifying? So after a long thought and a lot of, I used to have a kid that didn't sleep. So like I was up a lot. So I have these amazing thoughts, I think at 2 a.m. So I got up one morning, I was like, I wonder why we can't have a training or conference geared towards all law enforcement admin across the state. So I approached my chief of police, who's phenomenal. Like he's all about like, if you have an idea and it's going to better our department, go for it. And he's like, do it. He's like, see what you can find out, see what you can do. So I started calling around, I started calling the state. There was nothing for us. There was no funding. There's really nothing. And I was like, okay. So I started researching, and I have a lot of networking fingers kind of here and there throughout my time. And I found that I was like, I know some people that they could cater some of their speaking towards law enforcement admins. So through a long series of emails and phone calls, I started calling literally every department in North Dakota. And I was like, do you feel this way? Do you feel like you see the worst in your community, but you don't have any training of how to do the mental health side? And they're like, yes, I feel the same way. I feel like an island, but I have no one to connect with. I have no one to like reach out and ask questions to. And so I was like, I'm not the only one. Okay. So I got a few people behind me. I got our city commission to give me their blessing to say, this is good, go for it. I had no money, no agenda. And I was like, I'm just going to write down some of the things I know. Let's talk about conflict resolution, dealing with difficult people, boundaries. Because I don't know if people realize this, but for us as admins and clerks and office deputies, we get phone calls at home. We get Facebook at home, and they want to tell us about what their neighbors are doing. Or, I've had someone run up to me at a county fair and show me their neighbor's high grass because that's a city ordinance issue. And Like, you don't have any separation of your job when you live in a small town.
Right.
And so I go to
Yes.
church with these people, and they want to talk to me about, like, why were the police at so-and-so's house? Or they want to talk to me and complain to me about, like, why they were pulled over and all these things. And I'm like, do people realize that you are no longer, like, yourself? You can't go anywhere. Like, there's sometimes I can't go to a grocery store because we just arrested someone and I see them in the parking lot. I don't go to certain restaurants because I know, like, certain people work there. We've arrested them, and I have a lot of people in my children's classes that we've arrested their parents. And it's a little awkward picking up your kids next to someone you just had arrested in your office.
I have to tell you, Melinda, I've never, ever thought about this. So shame on me, first of all. But thank you for just in the context that I've considered this before is some of our elected official positions like city council and even a chamber, like I've been on our chamber board, not the same, but the same in the sense that like when you go out in the community, you are that person and your brain gets picked on stuff all the time, right? But I've never thought about the law enforcement side of it and just how many challenging things come up because the truth is I've talked a lot and I've done trainings and I've done, talks on boundaries and grace. And because like a lot of the conventional advice that's professional or personal development, like the gurus out there that have no idea what it's like to be in a small town will say, well, just like cut the people out of your life if they're not good for you. You can't do that. That's not what small towns are like. It's exactly what you just described. Like it's hard. You go to church and there might be somebody that you've had a negative situation with, and you don't get to just be like, oh, well, I'll just ignore them. And you especially can't because you're a public facing position. So I just want to thank you for bringing this forward because I think the skills that you're talking about are skills that apply widely.
Right.
But I can really see how you were feeling particularly challenged by this. And I can't wait to hear. So let me ask the question. How many years have you done this now? And the other question is just, is the state starting to recognize the need for this across the state? Or what's happened with that since?
Well, last year was our first year, and I kept kind of quiet about it because of COVID. I didn't, bring people into our community. I was like, I don't know how this is going to go, but I knew it was a need. And I had so many people say, well, why don't you guys do it through Zoom? And I said, but we need to get out of our office and network. We need to connect. We need to ask each other these questions. And I felt like that was such a huge need to, like, when I even called departments, they're like, there is no money for us, for admin to go have training because there is nothing for us. Right. So, like, I had to keep the registration so low so that department heads would allow their people to go. Yeah. And so with that, I had 24 departments represented. I had 55 people come to Bowman, and we had a great speaker. Our keynote was Katie Dales, but we talked about like how to tell if someone's carrying a gun, how to know if someone's lying. And we did have people from the state come, and they loved it.
Great.
So they are talking about changing some of the wording in the bylaws so that admins can access some funds.
Sure.
One of the things that we will have to discuss in the future is this conference. Will we have to become a nonprofit? Will the state? I'm hoping the state will pick it up. I'm hoping the state will say, you guys are such critical people because you look at retention rate of admins. You look at we have to keep a lot of things private. We can't go out and talk about these things. There's so much training for officers, but at the same time, like we don't have access to that training.
Right.
And so, one of the cases that still breaks my heart is there was a little 3-year-old, she's the same age as my kid. Her family kicked her out of the house in a wet diaper, and it was 20 degrees outside, and she ran across the street to grandma's house screaming at the door for 20 minutes, and the neighbors saw this. And they brought her in, and the grandmother was like, well, yeah, I knew she was out there. I just didn't want to deal with her. Here's a little 3-year-old in a diaper soaked, her feet are like raw because she's standing in cold ice. What do you do with that? I'm not a social service worker. I'm not an officer, but I still have to deal with that. I still have to see that and still put that somewhere. And I don't talk about this stuff with my husband because he doesn't want to know about. He's like, I want to love this community. I don't want to see this. So even going to the park with my children, like if I tell my husband, we need to leave right now, he doesn't even question me. He's like, okay, let's go.
Yeah. Wow, Melinda, that's hard. And it's trauma. The things that you're seeing, and you have, like you said, you have to have a place to put it. You have to have a place and a way to process it in lieu of talking out loud to everybody in town about it, right? Which you would never do. That's got to be really, really hard. Oh my gosh. So your first year that's a huge success. Let me just say,
we
by
had,
the
like I
way.
said, no money. No, we had no
Yep.
agenda. I had tons of people challenge me and saying like, well, why don't you find some speakers? I said, well, first off, it'd be great if I had money to find such and such speakers, but there are no speakers who are geared towards law enforcement admins. There are speakers out there who are geared towards law enforcement,
Right.
but there's no one who's geared towards the civilian side when we don't have the authority or the badge. We're the first ones who answer the door, first ones at the window, first ones who answer the phone, and 99% of the people come into our office, they're not happy. You deal with a lot of angry people every day.
Right.
And you still have to be great. You still have to be customer service. You still have to serve. And then you got to turn around and serve your officers. They're my customers. I got to make sure that they're ready to go out and serve our community.
Right.
And so you serve this dual role, and there was no training available. So I'm really hoping over the next few years as this grows some legs and as it really progresses that the state says, wow, because we have 4 states now come, Wyoming, Montana, South Dakota, and North Dakota, because they have nothing either, but they see a need. So I'm really hoping that somebody will say, hey, let's provide some like mental health, training to them. Let's give them some funding, because we are the hidden backbones to the law enforcement, because we're the ones who run the offices so that our officers can go out. We're the ones who are usually putting stuff on social media. We're the ones that are, really, first, you could tell when you call an office and an admin's not happy.
Right.
So we have to hide those things.
Yeah. So I think this story, it's so important for a number of reasons. First of all, I just think it is really valuable for the average person listening to this podcast. Like, we have a lot of small town listeners, right? For them to hear the struggle from a person in your position, I think is really important, because hopefully we can all think about the people that have your job in our communities with a little more care and a little more love. And maybe I'll just say a challenge right now: send your law enforcement administrative people a goodie basket or a thank you card. Yeah. Just go ahead and just do that. That would be really special. But I also think a huge part of your story is that persistence to solve the problem for yourself. It sucks that the state didn't have something for you and that 4 states didn't, but you could have either said, well, woe is us, like that's too bad, or you could do what you did and get out on the internet and research it. Like, we are in a time now where if you have a problem, there's almost nothing we can't figure out, right? I mean, if we're talking just like regular challenges, right? I mean, you Googled and you found communities or, other states that were doing something, and you were able to start small. That's another huge key in what you've shared, is that you don't have to have an enormous budget to figure stuff out. You need to have, some dedication, some perseverance, do some research, and try it.
Right. And that's the main thing, is that, like, for me, I was just like, what's the worst that could happen? What's the best that could happen? Mm-hmm. And so like I have a committee. I have 5 other departments that are on this committee, and they kind of help me, proofread, and they help me fundraise, and they get bags together and set up and clean up. And I would be nowhere without these ladies, because it balance me out. Because I'm kind of one of those people. I'm like, let's get a Ferris wheel. Let's do all these crazy. I mean, if I have like stars in my eyes, if I could get it and find the money, I will do it. But, they've helped balance me, because there's so much that I want to do for my admins, because I feel like they are so valuable, and I feel like you deserve the best. You deserve the best speaker, best food. When you're coming to my town, you're coming to my home. So I'm going to feed you well. You're going to be welcome. One of the things that I don't know, behind me, you see this board, but there's so many thank you notes from that conference, because people came out to me with tears in their eyes afterwards, and they said, we have been forgotten for years. I've never met so-and-so, and I've worked with her for 20 years, and I've only talked to her through the phone. And they go, this is so valuable. They said, thank you so much for remembering us. They said, we have been so forgotten, because the officers get all the glory, which they should. I mean, they're the ones risking their lives, but we're the ones that are getting everything ready for them in the backside of everything. But at the same time, I have a wonderful chief of police. I will tell you, my chief of police answers the phone. He's so supportive of me. And to hear other people come up to me and they're like, how do you get your chief of police to answer the phone? I'm like, he picks it up. Like, it's just like a foreign concept to me that we're not a team player, but it's very true. Like, you are pegged in your hole, and you stay in your hole and don't move. And so one of the things that we're going to talk about at this conference this year is how to grow in a career when there's no career ladder. Like, how do you find joy? Where do you find leadership? Where do you find motivation when there's nowhere really for you to grow? And that's a big thing that I find is so important because there's nowhere even in the state level, like auditors, state auditors, and there's nothing really for us to grow in. So, to be in this job for 30 years and deal with 99% of negative people every day is hard.
The burnout rate has to be, is it high? Is the burnout rate for people in your position high?
I would say if the benefits aren't there, like health benefits and stuff, it's really high. So
sure.
I've seen where like counties and cities where there's not a lot of benefits, their turnover is really high.
Well, I am so glad that you reached out to share this with our audience. I think it's really important that people know, okay, so by the off chance that somebody listening to this is a law enforcement admin, know there's a home for you. And you could be in Wyoming, you could be in Montana or South Dakota, and it all still matters. I also want everybody listening to know that we will be sharing all the information about your conference. When is the date, by the way?
We're October 20th and 21st.
Oh, okay, perfect. That's a lot of time. It's a lot of time between now.
Because I was I'm going to any place, anyone that wants to listen, any place that wants to talk.
Perfect.
But one of the things that's been really cool is that Texas does a school rotation so they can go to different departments and cities. And I love that idea. Texas is really good they sent me their last 5-year agenda and gave me all their ideas. And they actually invited me to come to their conference. They're like, come, we want you to see hands-on what we do here.
Right. Are you going to get to go?
I would like to go, but one of the things now that since I've pioneered this, I have to kind of train over the next person who's going to take over. So Stark County Sheriff's Office is going to take it in 22, 23. And so I have promised that I will hold, hands and do whatever they need to go because, we're creating the agenda as we go.
Right.
And so I pretty much have this is like my bag. This is my jam. I love finding speakers. I love organizing them. I love networking people. I love being on the phone, but not everybody enjoys that, but they want to host it.
Right.
So that is something that I have promised Stark County that I will definitely walk them through the first year. And then I'm hoping after that, it gets some more legs and more people on the committee so that I can go and actually enjoy the conference as a participant.
Right. Well, honestly, what you just shared too is another reminder to people that if you see something like a model of something that you like, if you're able to go attend it, that's such a great way to figure out. I mean, we rarely have to recreate wheels.
Exactly.
I mean, rarely. And in your case, you're doing it for the first time in North Dakota, but there are other places that you're picking up these cool ideas from. So I just think this story is so important for so many reasons. And you touched on a number of things that I think are going to help so many people. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time to tell us all about this conference and your experience so far in North Dakota. I'll just say on behalf of other North Dakotans, I'm happy to have you in our state.
Well, I think one of the last things I'd like to reiterate is just that I wanted us to unify as law enforcement. These last few years have been really hard on law enforcement. Yes, we have some really negative, we have some bad apples in our groups, but at the same time, there's some amazing men and women who serve our communities.
Right.
And I felt like we needed to unify, even if it's just at the administration level or clerk level, we needed to unify. And I think you have a better understanding and grace when you see someone who's in the sheriff's department in your PD or highway patrol, U.S. Marshals, and you say, wow, you guys do a great job. And we actually made a pledge to each other last year that we wouldn't bounce calls to each other because we have a tendency to be like, oh, call so-and-so, call so-and-so. So we raised our hands and made a pledge that we wouldn't do that to each other and we would be better at customer service and remember the love that we have for our community. So I felt like that was just even a starting point of if we would have just stayed with PD or just stayed with Sheriff's Office, none of this would have ever happened. So this is so unique that we are across the board, not only 4 states, but across the board with different departments and agencies. And I just wanted to let people know our admins are literally the hidden backbones, but we do more than just answer the phone. We serve our community in so many different ways. And I am so blessed and honored that even though I started this idea, these ladies have blessed me in so many ways by just saying, I see the vision, I see the passion, and then they came. And that, to me, it just means more to me than anything else. So I'm actually more blessed, I think, than anyone else because they saw the vision and passion.
Yeah. Oh, it's an amazing story, Melinda. So thank you. Thank you for the work that you're doing. It really, really does matter. And I hope that this inspires somebody else that has a need of their own to just step out and look for answers, look for solutions, and start small.
Exactly.
Okay, don't be a stranger. Come and see us again.
I would love it. Thank you.
Thank you. We say it all the time on the show that oftentimes the person that has the solution to the problem that you see is likely you. And Melinda's such a great example of that. I also want to share that Melinda reached out to me saying, hey, I've done this thing. I think it's kind of cool. I'd love to share it with you. So if you're listening to this and you think I've done something cool like that, and it would benefit small town people to hear about it, please reach out. That's what we want to do. That's the kind of people we want to feature on the show. And so I just never want anybody to underestimate the power that they actually have to do what they can with what they have to grow their small town. Until we see you next time, friends. Talk to you soon.